The rumor that Madison was about to leave looked, at first glance, like nothing more than a clean career turn and orderly exit from Fairmont Crest. A polite step away from the noise, toward a colder world where science could replace questions with measurable answers. But in a place where power survives on secrecy, every departure is treated like betrayal, and every vacancy becomes an invitation for something uglier to move in. The real shock did not come from the rumor itself, but from the timing that followed it like a shadow. An old file was dragged out of storage not because of harmless curiosity, but because a staffer cross-checked a record code, because a faded seal sharpened under a scanner's light, because a line of text that had once been blacked out suddenly turned against whoever ordered it hidden. In that instant, the past stopped being something finished and became an animal that had been chained to long, now unlocked and released with teeth. Chelsea, clinging to Copenhagen like a life raft for a relationship already swaying at the edge, accidentally shoved Madison into the center of a truth so cold it stung. Madison's parentage was not a private ache or a personal mystery. It was a missing piece capable of collapsing entire alliances because in Fairmont Crest, people do not fear truth because it is ugly, but because it shatters the order that protects them. Madison had always been difficult to read, not because she performed mystery, but because she lived as if softness was a luxury she could not afford. She wore discipline like armor, chose precision over sentiment, and trusted data more than promises. The way she dodged childhood stories, the sudden silences whenever the word family entered a conversation, the irritation that rose in her throat when someone casually framed her life as fortunate, those things had once been dismissed as personality. Now they carried a new meaning, as if every reflex she had cultivated was a trail leading back to a name she had spent her life outrunning. Her anger was never loud. It was dense, cold, inward, the kind that gnawed at the ribs, because there was nowhere safe to release it. She resented Chelsea's questions and the bright insistence that love could fix anything, not because she did not care, but because being pulled out of the controlled world she had built felt like being stripped in public. Chelsea was the opposite. Her choices ran ahead of her caution. Her heart sprinted first and asked permission later. She had believed Copenhagen could be their reset button, a fresh air pocket where Madison could stop living like a tightened wire, and where both of them could breathe without Fairmont Crest's eyes pressing into their backs. Chelsea wanted to believe that outside the gates, things became less toxic, less judgmental, less predatory. But darkness in Fairmont Crest did not stand still. It followed by routes that did not need light. And then the final signal arrived with cruel precision. A misplaced DNA result was delivered to the exact wrong address, into the exact wrong hands. The mistake was too perfect to be accidental. The recipient name, the code, the timestamp, each detail looked arranged, staged, dropped like a match into a room full of fumes. The real fear was not only what the paper said, but the realization that someone had designed this moment, that someone expected Chelsea's impulsiveness and Madison's guardedness to react like chemicals once exposed to air. The old file did not read like a normal adoption record. It was scarred with redactions, missing signatures, blurred seals, and worse, it lacked what should have existed to protect the child: transparency. When a family adopts, records are kept to safeguard rights. When someone changes an identity, records are kept to safeguard adults. Madison stared at those pages like they were a sentence. Either she remembered nothing, because her childhood had been hollowed out, or she remembered too much, and had been taught to silence herself, to keep another person standing. Both possibilities were terrifying. Her anger began to search for a target. Was it Chelsea, for pulling her into this? Was it the Montgomery family, for giving her life, but binding it with conditions? Or was it herself, for believing she had always been in control, only to discover that from the beginning, she had been shaped by a decision made without her consent? The name Montgomery, once a wall that protected, now felt like a wall that trapped. Inside that family existed a powerful woman who treated reputation like a shield, an extinguished scandal before it could breathe. There was also a man long assumed uninvolved, always speaking in the language of reason, always performing neutrality, yet now, in the light of these documents, he appeared like someone who had been standing in the center of the storm from the start. If Madison was not the biological child everyone believed her to be, then the praise she had earned, the expectations placed on her, the identity she had built with relentless effort, all of it suddenly tasted bitter. Had she been loved for who she was, or for what she represented inside a story carefully edited to look perfect? And if her biological parents connected directly to the alliances currently holding Fairmont Crest together, then this was no longer a family matter. It was war, because when bloodline touches power, it doesn't just demand truth. It demands payment. Chelsea's fear ignited into fury. She hated the sensation of being used as a trigger, hated the thought that someone believed she could be controlled simply because she loved Madison. She began rereading the last few weeks with new eyes, late-night calls that ended too quickly, vague messages that felt like bait, sudden concern about her Copenhagen schedule from people who had never cared before. The more she noticed, the more she understood that the trip could be either salvation or trap. But retaliation required weapons, and Chelsea's only weapons were her voice, her visibility, and her refusal to behave. In Fairmont Crest, visibility is a gift and a curse. If she spoke, she could force the truth into daylight, but she could also make Madison a public target, stripping her of the right to choose her own life. If she stayed quiet, she became a willing part of the machine that had buried a child's origins for adult convenience. Chelsea was cornered by the cruelest paradox. Her love wanted to protect, yet protection sometimes becomes the most poisonous silence of all. Madison faced an even harsher decision: keep the secret to protect the powerful woman who raised her, someone who might have done wrong while believing she was doing right, or expose everything to claim the right to live honestly, even if honesty burned down the world around her. Madison's pain was not only the pain of deception, it was the pain of understanding how power works. She knew that, if she opened her mouth, they would not attack only her. They would attack Chelsea, her career, her credibility, her future. They would frame Madison as ungrateful, convert the story into entertainment, turn DNA into headlines, turn childhood into content for strangers to dissect. Her anger became a silent pressure that made her want to destroy everything and disappear at the same time. Meanwhile, Fairmont Crest began to smell danger the way sharks smell blood. Alliances that depended on fragile balance turned aggressive. People tested the air with carefully planted questions, gentle concerns that carried hidden threats. Some were frightened because they sensed their own secrets might be pulled into the blast radius. Some were thrilled because they saw an opportunity to crush rivals, and someone, invisible in the background, calculated the final moment to strike. No gun, no blade, just the right document delivered to the right place at the right time. The biggest question stopped being who Madison was and became who wanted Madison to be someone else, who needed her to lose control, who needed Chelsea separated from anyone who could protect her. In that person's mind, Copenhagen might be their escape route or the perfect stage for a detonation before Madison and Chelsea could cross the gate and disappear. Chelsea began to suspect she had been used from the beginning, that her impulsiveness had been predicted and patiently waited for. She felt like both victim and tool, and the contradiction made her reckless. She wanted to throw the file onto the center of the living room, a moral bomb, and force everyone to look at it. Yet every time she looked at Madison, she saw someone fighting not to shatter. Madison did not need another push, she needed a shoulder. But Chelsea's care sometimes felt to Madison like humiliation, as if she was being treated as fragile. Their relationship slipped into a vicious loop. The more they loved, the more easily they wounded. The more Chelsea tried to protect, the more Madison felt her autonomy slipping away. The file continued to reveal small details, sharp enough to cut through any illusion of peace. A sealed medical procedure dated exactly when Madison appeared in the Montgomery family. A signature that matched a name he wanted spoken. a blurred stamp still recognizable as belonging to a facility tied to an old scandal. These fragments raised the most horrifying possibility. Madison had not simply been adopted. She may have been transferred an answer to a crisis, a solution to a scandal. If that was true, then Madison's story was not only personal tragedy, it was structural sin. She finally understood why she had always been obsessed with control. She had lived like someone required to prove she deserved to exist, as if her existence had once been a convenient decision for powerful people rather than a miracle. As the countdown to the flight tightened, pressure became unbearable. The powerful woman in the Montgomery orbit began to constrict the situation. Without needing to say a word, every gesture carried warning. The supposedly uninvolved man revealed strange urgency, too calm, too eager to close the file, too afraid Chelsea might say something irreversible. Chelsea realized she was standing inside a theater where everyone played a role, and the truth was the only actor forbidden from stepping on stage. It hurt to accept that love might not be enough to fight an entire system. Yet that pain also made Chelsea dangerous. She was no longer a woman running only on emotion. She was a woman willing to burn bridges, if that was the cost of refusing to be controlled. Madison looked at Chelsea and found another choice beneath the obvious ones. It was not only secret versus exposure, it was product versus person. Either she continued living as a polished outcome of someone else's cover-up, or she demanded the right to choose who she would become, even if the price was destruction. But choice always comes with consequences, and Madison's consequences could include the downfall of the powerful woman who once used influence to protect reputation, the exposure of the man who had been in the storm all along, and the collapse of alliances Fairmont Crest depended on. Madison felt like she held a match inside a room soaked in gasoline. She hated being forced into the role of destroyer. She hated being forced into silence even more. At last, her anger found its true target: not Chelsea, not herself, but the people who decided her fate without ever asking her permission. Then, just as the chaos seemed to pause for breath, the final strike began to surface: a new alert, an added document, a second thread of DNA evidence, something designed to ensure the explosion could not be smothered. Chelsea understood that, if the Copenhagen flight took off, the secret might be buried temporarily, or it might detonate somewhere uncontrollable, trapping them between sky and truth with nowhere to set the blade down. She looked at Madison and knew they were out of time for pretending it would be fine. They had only enough time left to decide what they would be inside this story: victims dragged by forces bigger than them, or women who stood upright and paid the price of refusing to bend. Fairmont Crest still glittered, still looked flawless, still wore luxury like a mask, but beneath that surface, layers of silence were cracking, and every crack carried the hiss of a secret rising. When Chelsea pulled her suitcase to the door, when Madison stood motionless, like someone who had lost the ground beneath her feet, they both understood the same truth. Copenhagen was no longer a romance or a healing journey. It was a border crossing where truth would choose how to appear, whether they wanted it or not. And just before they stepped outside, the final sign arrived in the most ruthless way, as if someone's hand had already settled on the switch, ready to flip it, ready to make everything explode on the runway before the plane could lift, before they could call for help, before Fairmont Crest could pretend nothing had ever happened. And viewers won't want to miss what comes next, so don't forget to leave a comment below